Deleting it and leaving an empty space would be a bit of a waste. Momonga sat on the throne and distracted himself from his slight satisfaction and thus multiplied shame. He looked out across the room and noticed Sebas and the maids standing stiffly at the bottom of the stairs. In this room, their rigid postures seemed somehow lacking. Oh right, he thought, there was this one command. Genuflect. Albedo, Sebas, and the 6 maids all dropped to one knee at once and bowed, as if they were his subjects. That's better. Momonga lifted his left wrist and checked the time 23:55:48. He made it just in time. By now, the game masters are probably making announcements non-stop. There are probably fireworks, but Momonga was cut off from all that, so he didn't really know. He leaned back in the throne and looked up at the ceiling. He had thought a party might show up to storm them on the last day, since this was the base of the guild that had crushed that punitive expedition. He had been waiting. As guild master, he was ready to take on the challenge. He had sent an email to all of his old guildmates, but only a handful replied. He had been waiting. As guild master, he was excited to welcome his old mates. Is this guild just a relic of the past? He wondered. Now there was no one around, but it sure had been a lot of fun. He moved his eyes to count the flags hanging from the ceiling. 41. A flag for every guild member with their crest. He pointed a phalanx at one of them. Me. Then he moved his finger one over. That flag had the crest of Aints Ul Gaun No, the entire game's best player, the one who originally proposed starting their guild. He was also the one who had united its forerunner, the first 9. Touch me. The next one over was the crest of Aints Ul Gaun's oldest member, age-wise, a university professor in the real-world Death Suzaku. Momonga's fingers sped up as he went. The next member was one of the guild's only 3 women, Ankoro Mokai Moche. Momonga continued naming all the guild members according to their crests, with no hesitation. Hero Hero, Perorancino, Bubbling Teapot, Tabula Smaragdina, the Warrior Take Mikazuchi, Variable Talisman, Jinjiro. It didn't take long for him to say all 40 of his guildmates' names. They were still burned into his brain. He slumped down in the throne, somewhat tired. Yeah, we had fun. The game was free to play, but Momonga spent about 1/3 of his monthly salary on microtransactions. He wasn't making so much money, he just didn't have any other hobbies. So Yggdrasil was all he spent money on. Once he put so much into a lottery that came with a bonus. He blew straight through the bonus. He went to all that trouble and finally got the rare item he'd been after, but Yameko, a guildmate, won it for the price of a single lunch out. Oh, that's... He had writhed around on the floor. Aints Ul Gaun was popular with working adults. Almost everyone was buying stuff in-game, but Momonga definitely spent a lot. He was probably pretty high up even among everyone on the server. That's how hooked he had been. Questing was fun too. Playing with friends was even more fun. To Momonga, with his parents already gone and no friends in the real world, Aints Ul Gaun represented awesome times he'd spent with his friends. And now he was going to lose it. How miserable, how awful. He tightened his grip on the staff. Momonga was a normal office worker. He didn't have the money or connections to do anything. He was just another user whose only choice was to silently accept the end. In the corner of his vision, he saw the time 23:57. The servers would shut down at midnight. There was almost no time left. His fantasy world was ending. Soon all his days would be spent in reality. It's only natural. Humans can't live in a daydream. That's why everyone left. Momonga sighed. He had to be up at 4 tomorrow morning. If he didn't go to bed as soon as the servers went down, it would affect his work. 23:59, 35, 36, 37, Momonga counted down along with the numbers. 23:59, 48, 49, 50, he closed his eyes. 23:59, 58, 59, he counted the moments as they ticked off the clock to the end of his fantasy. Here comes the blackout. 00012 Momonga opened his eyes. He wasn't back in his room. He was still in Yggdrasil in the throne room. What's going on? The time was accurate. He should have been booted by now. 0:38, it was definitely after midnight. The time displayed by the system clock could not possibly be off. Unsure how to proceed, he looked around for any information. Was the shutdown postponed? Or is there some kind of lost time? Countless possibilities crossed his mind, but they were all far from convincing. The most likely was that for some reason, some unfavorable reason, the server shutdown had been postponed. If that were the case, the GMs would probably be making announcements. He rushed to turn the communication channels back on, but his hands stopped. His menu wouldn't come up. What is this? Feeling slightly uneasy and confused, but surprised by how calm he was, Momonga tried to use some other features. He tried forced system access, bypassing the menu. He tried the chat function. He tried a GM call. He tried to force quit. He couldn't get to any of them. It was like he'd been locked out of the system. What is going on? His irate voice echoed across the spacious throne room and faded away. This is the last day. It's unthinkable that something like this could happen on the day that is supposed to be the end of it all. Were they teasing us? What came over him now was irritation at not being able to make a beautiful exit at the game's glorious end. It could be felt in each word he spoke. It almost sounded like he was taking out his anger on someone, but there shouldn't have been any response. However, is something the matter, Lord Momonga? It was a pretty woman's voice, and he was hearing it for the first time. Momonga was dumbfounded. He looked to see where it had come from. When he saw who had spoken, he was absolutely shocked. It was an NPC looking up at him, albedo. Khan was a small village not far from the Tove woodlands. It was at the southern edge of the Azalizia Mountains. These mountains formed the border between the Empire and the Kingdom. The population was about 120. 25 households was not an uncommon size for a village on the frontiers of the Rey Estais Kingdom. Khan mainly relied on agriculture and the bounty of the forest. The only visitors apart from an apothecary who came to acquire herbs were the tax collectors. The phrase "time had stopped" was an apt descriptor of the place. The day started early in the village. Villagers generally awoke at dawn. Unlike the larger cities, they didn't have magically maintained continual light, so they rose and slept with the sun. Henry Emmott's mornings began with fetching water from the well near her house. Fetching water was women's work. Her first chore was done when the large pot in her house was full. By that time, her mother would be finished preparing breakfast. Then the 4 members of their family would sit down together to eat. Breakfast was barley and wheat oatmeal. They also had stout-ed vegetables, and on some days they ate dried fruit. After that, she would go out to work in the fields with her mother and father. Her younger sister, who was soon to be 10, would gather wood near where the forest started, or she would help in the fields. The bell in the center of town on the edge of the village square rang at noon. They would take a break from their work and eat lunch. Lunch was brown bread, baked some days earlier. It also included soup with bits of preserved meat in it. Then it was back to the fields. When the sky began to redden, they would return home and eat dinner. Dinner was the same brown bread as lunch. They also ate bane soup. If a hunter caught an animal, they would sometimes get a share of the meat. After the meal, they would chat as a family. They would also mend clothes by what light remained in the kitchen. They usually slept around 6 p.m. Henry Emmott had lived her whole life in this village. From the moment she was born to her current age of 16 years, she had been a member of this village. She thought her uneventful life would continue on the same way forever. One day, Henry awoke as usual and went to fetch water. She hauled the bucket out of the well and filled her small pot. It took about 3 trips to fill the large pot at home. Oof! She rolled up her sleeves. The parts of her skin that weren't tanned were glaringly white. Her arms were slender but well-toned from working in the fields. She even had some muscle. The pot was quite heavy once it was full of water, but she picked it up like usual. If I had a pot one size bigger, maybe I could reduce my number of trips. Henry was about to head home when she heard something. She looked in the direction it came from. Something set the air roiling and her heart frothing. Off in the distance, she heard the sound of something wooden being crushed, and then a scream. It was like the cry of a bird having its neck wrung, yet altogether different. Something cold raced down Henry's spine. No way, it's just my imagination. I misheard. Words to drown out her anxiety bubbled up, popped, and disappeared. Panicking, she started to run. The scream had come from the direction of her house. She abandoned her pot. It was too heavy to run with. Her feet got tangled in her long skirt and she nearly tripped, but luckily she managed to keep her balance and run on. More voices. Henry's heart was pounding. These were human screams, no doubt about it. Run, run, run. She couldn't remember ever having run this fast. She felt like she was going to trip over her own feet. Horses were whinnying. People were screaming. Shouts filled the air. It was all getting louder. Henry saw an armored figure swinging a sword at a villager still quite a ways away. The villager screamed and crumpled to the ground. The sword followed up with a finishing stab. Mr. Morger, She knew everyone in this small village. They were all like family, so of course she knew the man who had been killed. He could be a bit loud at times, but he was a good-natured person. He certainly didn't deserve to die like that. Henry nearly stopped in her tracks, but she grit her teeth and pushed herself to sprint even faster. This distance never felt terribly long when she was carrying water, but now it seemed like she would never arrive. Angry shouts and curses reached her ears on the wind. Finally, her house was in sight. Mom, Dad, Nemu, she called out to her family as she opened the door. Their 3 familiar faces were frightened, but they were all present, huddled together. As soon as she burst in, their expressions softened into relief. Henry, you're safe. She felt her father's rough farmer hands on her back as he hugged her, and she felt the warm hands of her mother. Okay, now that Henry's here, let's get out of here. The Emott family was in a pretty bad position. They didn't want Henry to come home to an empty house, so they'd missed their opportunity to escape. The danger must already be closing in. That fear soon became reality. As the 4 of them were just about to make a run for it, a shadow appeared in the front entryway. Standing there with the sun at his back was a knight in full armor. The arms of the Baharuth Empire were emblazoned on his breastplate. In his hand was a naked blade, a longsword. The Baharuth Empire occasionally invaded its neighbor, the Rey Estai's kingdom, but usually the fighting was centered around the fortress city of Rantel. The enemy had never made it as far as Khan. But now the village's peace had been shattered. From the icy stare coming through the gap in the close helmet, Henry could sense that they were being counted. She hated the feeling of his eyes moving over them. A squeak from his metal gauntlet announced that he had tightened his grip on the sword. He moved into the house. Yaog, Henry's father tackled the knight. The pair of them tumbled out the front door. Go, hurry, you bastard. Her father's face was lightly smeared with blood. He must have cut himself when he rushed the knight. The 2 of them thrashed around on the ground. Her father struggled to keep the knight's dagger at bay. The knight struggled to keep her father's knife at bay. Seeing a family member's blood right before her eyes made Henry's mind go completely blank. Should she try to help him or escape? Henry, Nemu. The shout brought her back to reality. Her mother, though anguished, was shaking her head. Henry took her sister's hand and started to run. Hesitation and guilt made her reluctant, but she had to run as fast as she could to the forest. She heard the whinnies and screams of horses, angry voices, the clanging of metal, and the smell of something burning. From all over the village, sensations bombarded her eyes, ears, and nose. Where were they coming from? She was frantic to know as she ran. In open areas, she moved in a half-crouch, trying to stay in the shadows of houses. Fear made her blood run cold. The exertion of running wasn't the only reason her heart was pounding. The only thing keeping her moving was the little hand clasped in hers. Her sister's life, her mother, running a few paces ahead, suddenly stiffened and shrank back. She motioned with a hand behind her back to run the other way. When Henry realized why, she bit her lip to hold back a sob. She squeezed her sister's hand and ran to get as far away as they could. She didn't want to see what was going to happen next. Is something wrong, Lord Momonga? Albedo repeated her question. Momonga wasn't sure how to answer. This series of mysterious events had short-circuited his brain. Please excuse me. Momonga gazed at her absent-mindedly as she got up and came up close to him. Is something the matter? She leaned in, and her beautiful face was close to his. A faint, wonderful scent tickled Momonga's nostrils. Perhaps the fragrance helped his thoughts return to him. No, I'm all right, thank you, it's nothing. He wasn't quite naive enough to speak overly politely to Mannequin, but as soon as she spoke, he felt compelled to answer. There was something undeniably human about the way she spoke and moved. The situation he and Albedo were in felt strange, but he couldn't quite put his finger on why. He did his best to suppress the confusion and amazement that this vague understanding generated. He was just a normal guy. It didn't seem possible. Right as he was about to scream, he remembered the words of one of his guildmates, panic breeds failure. One must always have a composed, rational state of mind. Calm your heart and broaden your outlook. Don't let your thoughts take you prisoner. Keep your mind quick, Momonga. With that remembrance, his calm came flooding back to him. He mentally gave his thanks to the man known as the guild's Kongaming Squishy Moe. Are you all right? Albedo asked, awfully close to him. She tilted her head adorably and leaned in so far that their breaths were overlapping. With this gorgeous girl in his face, The calm Momonga had just regained threatened to fly straight back out the window. The GM call isn't working. Swallowed up by Albedo's glistening pupils, he found himself consulting with an NPC. A member of the opposite sex had never approached Momonga with this look in her eyes before, especially with such a lack of propriety. He knew it was just an NPC someone had made, but the flow of her expressions was so natural it was unsettling. But somehow he noticed those feelings settling down already, as if they were being held back. The lack of wider emotional fluctuation, however, gave him a touch of anxiety. He had thought it was due to his former mate's words, but is that really it? Momonga shook his head. Now wasn't the time. Please forgive me. I am so ignorant. I fear I am unable to answer your question regarding this GM call you speak of. Nothing would make me happier than a chance to clear myself of the disgrace of failing your expectations. Your wish is my command. We're having a conversation. No doubt about it. The realization assailed his entire body with a petrifying amazement. Impossible, this can't be happening. An NPC was talking. Well, there were macros that allowed them to do that. Players had been passing around data for battle cries and cheers. Still, conversation was impossible. Even just a minute ago, Sebas and the maids wouldn't respond to anything that wasn't a simple command phrase. So how is this happening? Is Albedo just special? He motioned for her to step back and glimpsed a flicker of reluctance as he looked away to Sebas and the maids, who still had their heads bowed. Sebas, maids, my lord, they answered in magnificent unison, raising their heads in a slick motion. Come to the foot of the throne. Yes, sir. Their voices aligned again, and they sprang to their feet. The group walked together with beautiful posture to the bottom of the steps leading to the throne. Then, each dropped to one knee and bowed. From this exchange, Momonga learned two things. First, although he had purposely avoided using command phrases, they could understand his intentions and carry them out. Second, Albedo was not the only one who could talk. At the very least, something weird was going on with all the NPCs in the throne room. As he was reflecting on these things, he had the same feeling as before that something was off about both Albedo and himself. Wanting to understand it, he scrutinized her. Is everything all right? Have I done something wrong? Arg. When he recognized the root of the incongruity, a sound that was neither a word, a gasp, nor a choking noise escaped his lips. It was the changing expressions. Her lips were moving, and he could hear her words. Flustered, he brought his fingers to his own lips and spoke. I am Po. My jaw is moving in the world of a DMMO RPG that went against all common sense. Mouths moving and words coming out. The expression graphics had been fixed, they hadn't moved before. Otherwise, why would the developers have made emoticons? Plus, Momonga's face was a skull, he didn't have a tongue or a throat. Looking down at his hands, there was no flesh. Even the bones weren't anatomically correct. Continuing along the same lines, he probably didn't have any internal organs, not to mention lungs. So why could he talk? Impossible. He felt the internal logic he had built up slowly over time begin to crumble, and an equivalent panic replaced it. He wanted to scream but held it in. As expected, the heat in his chest was abruptly soothed by a wave of calm. Momonga pounded the throne's armrest. As he thought, the number showing damage didn't pop up. What should I do? What makes the most sense? He was in an incomprehensible situation, but venting wouldn't get him anywhere. First, he needed information. Sebas. The expression on Sebas's face as he lifted his head was earnestness incarnate. He looked really alive. Could he give him an order? He wasn't sure what was going on, but he could assume the NPCs in the tomb were loyal to him, right? Actually, he didn't even know if these were their NPCs. Countless questions, and the anxiety that went with them, arose in his mind, but Momonga tuned it all out. In any case, there was no one better to send out for reconnaissance than Sebas. He glanced momentarily at Albedo, who was waiting off to the side, but he made up his mind to give the order to Sebas. He imagined what executives at work were like when directing regular employees and tried to act like one of them. Leave the tomb and confirm our surroundings within a half-mile radius. If there are any intelligent life forms, negotiate to bring them here on amicable terms. You can give them practically whatever they request in return. Avoid combat to the extent possible. Understood, Lord Momonga. I will leave without delay. In this world, it was definitely not possible to take NPCs built to protect a base and send them outside. But here it was possible. He wouldn't know for sure until the NPC actually made it outside. But take one member of the Pleiades with you, he instructed. If you're attacked, have her retreat immediately to bring back any information you have. With that, Momonga had made at least one move. He let go of the staff of Aints Ul Gown. It didn't clatter to the ground. Instead, it hung in the air as if someone were holding it. It was against the laws of physics, but it was just like the game. In Yggdrasil, items weren't uncommon to float in the air when one let go of them. The staff's aura of anguished faces twisted around his hand. It seemed reluctant to dissipate, but Momonga calmly ignored it. He wasn't necessarily used to it, but that sort of macro wasn't so strange. He shook his wrist to get rid of it. Crossing his arms, he thought about what his next move should be.